like to start with a question I know you wrestle with in all the work you've done. In some films more obviously than others, I think. And that's, I think, a question that any filmmaker working in anywhere on the spectrum in nonfiction filmmaking asks: what is the filmmaker's relationship to the subjects in terms of what you need to do to feel like you're doing your job the way you want to do it, without crossing ethical boundaries, without getting close enough, but too close. And it comes up over and over. And we've seen a lot of examples of that, because we hear you wrestling with it in voiceover many times. But talk to us about that in general.
Yeah, well, maybe I should have more boundaries than I have. I don't feel bound by the traditional notions of journalism in that way. I think most of us who make documentaries feel like there's a different set of rules, especially documentaries where we are spending a good deal of time with people than your typical everyday journalist deals with, because you don't deal with those inherent complexities of getting to know someone deeply, right, in everyday journalism. So for me, my simple sort of test is, and it's self-serving, I guess, is when I go home at night after filming, do I feel okay about what I just did? Or do I have some real questions? And sometimes I have real questions. So, I mean, it depends on the film. A film like Stevie, for example, that we saw, that's a film where the very questions about the ethics of documentary filmmaking and what are we doing and how are we exploiting or possibly exploiting or manipulating situations to tell a story, and where are those lines. That's a film that very much approaches that, and some who've seen that film say I crossed that line, which I think is fair. But with other films, it's a hard question to answer in a pithy way, but I think it's more about feeling like you're telling the story honestly and candidly. And I don't have a problem. In fact, I encourage getting close to the main subjects of the film, because I think it allows for more candor and honesty if there is that bond and a trust between you, but that does not relieve me of the responsibility of trying to tell the story honestly either. That's the toughest part of it.
Do you find that your relationship with key subjects in every film, does that change film to film, depending on, necessarily depending on the people you're trying to capture?
Yeah, some relationships are deeper for sure, and some less so. Sometimes the circumstances of what people are going through contributes to just how deep that relationship goes. For example, with Arthur and William and Hoop Dreams, with Arthur, the real connection began when for those of you who have seen the film, it's like he started out at St. Joe's, the school that William was at as well, but then because his family ran into financial difficulty and Arthur wasn't really talented enough to make special amends for, they let him go back to his public school on the West Side. And I remember showing up at a basketball game after that had happened, not with a camera, but just to watch him play, and he came up to the stands afterwards, he says, "What are you doing here?" And I was like, "Well, what do you mean, what am I doing here?" And he was like, "Well, I'm not at St. Joe's anymore, I figured you wouldn't be interested in me." They thought basically I'm a failure, so why would you want to make a film about me? And, so that was a bonding moment. When William blew his knee out, I went and hung out with him, because he was stuck at home for days on end, so I'd hang out. So there are certain things that you do, I think, that you try to communicate to your subjects that it's about more than just making the movie. And I think if that's not genuine, they will see through that. I don't know if I've answered your question.
You have, and in a situation like Stevie, that's very different, because this is somebody you knew when you were quite young, right at graduate school at Carbondale, Illinois, right? Did you?
Yeah, the film Stevie is what gave me the gray hair. You noticed I didn't have gray hair for part of that.
But that was a very different, I mean, you were a big brother to him.
Yes.
This is all laid out in the beginning of the picture if you haven't seen it, or haven't seen it in a while, but it's a personal relationship, and
yes.
It's somebody that you spent time with and always felt uneasy about leaving and not checking in with him really anymore. And you knew he was, it was not an easy life for this kid, but then the film, of course, deals with exactly how difficult and for the anguish that's gotten. But
Yeah.
that's a different situation.
No, that was very much a different situation, and that's what I mean when I say that's a film that, you know, part of its subject matter is about the very ethics of documentary filmmaking. It's like, was it right for me to come back into his life the way I did, and then tell this pretty terrible story of what was going on with him? You know, I think, and I kind of put it in the film, and I'm in the film, so you can sit there and say, yeah, I think you did the wrong thing there, if you're inclined to see me that way. But I made the film, I wrestled with that very issue throughout the entire making of the film. I'm glad I made the film, because I feel like it is a film that ultimately is attempting to grapple with, hopefully in a very human way, with how the Stevies of the world come to be, and then what we in society tend to do with them, which is to throw them away. So I'm glad I made the film, but nonetheless, there was no easy answer as to the question, should I have made the film?
A lot of your work is not addressing Chicago at all, like Abacus, Too Small to Jail, among other things, which is, if you have not seen that, that's a really sharp documentary about the only financial institution prosecuted in the entire 2008 mortgage crisis. And rather than too big to fail, we have too small to jail. But, and yet, if you look at the Chicago pictures, the interrupters, like itself, as much as Chicago pictures, any of them, and of course Hoop Dreams and others. Back to, what was the second film you made? It was I think called Grassroots Chicago? Or Chicago Grassroots?
Yeah, that was a work for hire, Michael.
Yeah, we're going to roll that right now. No, but another, a slice of Chicago.
Yes.
Okay, what is it about?
You didn't actually watch that, did you?
I did.
Oh my God, wow.
I mean, they were going to fly me out here, for God's sake. But,
wait, they flew you out here?
You've revisited, the great subject, this unruly subject of Chicago over and over. How much of what you see in that city do you think it pertains to, a universal situation? These outrages of, legal issues, of just
right.
Every human, the search for kind of fairness and decency, which really runs through an awful lot of the work. How much of that is Chicago and how much of that is universal?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, I think that there are great universalities, of course, in Chicago that I think apply to certainly big cities all across America and I think beyond. Injustice is not unique to Chicago. Violence, urban violence is not unique at all to Chicago. But as a Chicagoan, the city also takes tremendous pride in, and people who are from Chicago take a tremendous pride in their city and their Midwestern values. So there's a lot to love about Chicago. But it's also a very right place to explore I think in very deep and meaningful ways, the things that bedevil us all. Race in America, something that I have a particular interest in. I couldn't really live in a better or, depending on how you look at it, worse place to examine those issues, because I think Chicago is in many ways the most segregated city in America. And when we first got to Chicago back in the mid-'80s, my wife and I was struck by how divisive that city was racially. And things are better in a lot of ways today, but things are not so good in a lot of ways.
Do you recall the first time you picked up a camera as a kid, a movie camera?
I never picked up a movie camera as a kid. I was just picking up basketball mostly. But it wasn't until I got to JMU, downstate, down from here, not too far, Harrisonburg, that I fell in love with film, and I fell in love with movies, not documentaries. I didn't watch documentaries or any of that. I mean, I liked movies, and I took a film appreciation course in the English department, because people said it was a lot of fun, said it wasn't too hard, and I liked movies. And so they actually did the professor, Ralph Cohen, I'll never forget, because he was very influential on me. He did a whole semester on auteurs, so we looked at the films of Ernst Lubitsch, Jean Renoir, Alfred Hitchcock, and Arthur Penn. And I just, at that point, I kind of fell for it, for film. I had no idea how I'd do it, but I fell for it. And that eventually led to me going to grad school, following my wife there to SIU, Southern Illinois University, Chicago, Illinois, and studying film and then making my way.
It's happened much more often in the last couple of decades where you see all kinds of Hollywood product, and I do mean product in this case, adopting kind of the generalized faux documentary look,
yeah.
Which usually means drunken cameraman on stage.
Yeah.
And
the kind of cameraman that in real documentary we would never hire that guy.
Well, it's literally. I mean, I think if you trace it back, it's literally like camera work under fire. I mean, that's why we
camera.
Yeah. Is the prevalence of that something that you that maybe shapes your work? Like how are you literally gonna visualize this, capture this? Have you found yourself almost going the other way sometimes?
That's an interesting question. I mean, I feel like when narrative cinema adopts those approaches, sometimes it works beautifully and wonderfully, and so it's not like I look down my nose at it at all. Sometimes it's an attempt to give an authentic veneer to a story that isn't very realistic or authentic. I think in doc, I don't think too much about what they're doing in narrative cinema myself. I have certain things that as a documentary filmmaker, I tend to steer away from a lot of shaky cam in the footage unless I feel like it has something to say. I don't like it for effect, so I'm always looking to, I want to immerse you in the story, so really showy camera work can often get in the way of that. There's a moment, and it's interesting because there's a moment in Stevie, in this clip that they showed, where you see the camera going all over the place and then finally comes in to focus on Wendy. And I left that in the film because I felt like that was one of those moments where it kind of defined us kind of like reacting to something where she is just suddenly going off and we weren't ready for it, and I wanted to be true to the kind of, it almost give you this sense of us as filmmaker, like, holy shit, we have to get our act together and get this. And I wanted to preserve, so that felt like it said something, it wasn't just shaky cam to be kind of cool.
5 years with your co-director on Hoop Dreams. Is that figure correct? That you spent 5 years roughly gathering 250 hours of footage?
My partners on Hoop Dreams, yes.
Yes.
Yes, yeah, about almost 5 years.
5 years. The series that you'll see on Starz, we'll watch the first episode of the series, 10-part series, America to Me. That was a year in the life of Oak Park, River Forest High, where your own kids went, right?
Yes.
To school, but not during the year that you were filming.
No, I knew better than to.
Subject. Do you feel that are there moments on those long lead projects where you lose the thread, and you think, where is the film?
I've not had that experience. I find that I get so immersed in the lives that we're filming that it is a constant sort of process of discovery, but I actually love that about it. So, and I feel like if you keep yourself open to where the story wants to take you, then you're gonna come up with a more authentic and true film by the end of it. I like to say that that what you watch when the film is done is a distillation of the experience that we had making it. So I try to keep in, if I'm surprised at something that happens during the course of the filming, I try to preserve that sense of it for you as a viewer as well. So like, for instance, in Hoop Dreams, suddenly William shows up and he has a baby and a girlfriend, and you hadn't seen the girlfriend or the baby until the baby's like a number of months old. And that's the way it was revealed to us. He kept it a secret from me, and he kept the girlfriend a secret from me. And then suddenly I heard about it from his mom, where he said, you know William's got a child, right? And I was like, no, I didn't even know he had a girlfriend. And he said, oh yeah. So I talked to William about it, and he agreed to let us film. Before he said something really interesting. I'm getting off the topic here a little bit, but he said, I said, well, why did you keep it from me? He said, well, because I just figure people will look at me as just another one of those black guys, young guys in the city who go around having a bunch of babies. And I said, well, do you love your daughter? Yeah. I said, do you feel like you're one of those guys? He goes, no. I said, what about your girlfriend? Do you love her? He goes, yeah, I plan to marry her. I go, so you're not what you fear that people are going to see you as. So I think it's really important that people see that. And so then he agreed to do it, but we preserved that surprise in the film, that suddenly there's a child. Because we could have faked it, we could have gone and gotten pictures and gotten some photos from whatever, we could have faked it somehow, but I didn't want to do that because I feel like it's important that you have a similar journey as a viewer to the journey that we had as filmmakers.
And there are documentary filmmakers who simply would not have that conversation. They would think, right or wrong, I think following, it's the old question of objectivity versus subjectivity, which I don't think, frankly, objectivity exists in either narrative or documentary. And but it is a different relationship than many are willing to have. It comes naturally to you, and so it's coming from a good place.
Well, yeah, I mean, like, what's behind your question too is this thing, the question we often, every documentary filmmaker who's here gets this question at film festivals, which is, how did the camera being there change the story that we see? Like, what if the camera weren't there? How would this story have been different? Which is, of course, an impossible question to answer unless you believe in the alternative universe theory. Like where we could go see how the story played out without the camera. But since we can't do that, you can't answer it. But not to be glib, but it's a good question. But my feeling all along has been, a couple of things. One is that it's definitely different. But in my experience, the forces at work in people's lives, at least the stories that I've been telling, are so great that the presence of the camera doesn't seem to make much of a difference, certainly not a positive difference, often. So it's not really having an impact. And the degree to which our being there changes it, I think, is actually often a very good thing, because making a documentary on someone causes them to ruminate on their lives. They can't be a subject of film and not think, why did they pick me? Why am I here? What is this about? What are we doing? And if you talk to them, which I do, I believe in that, I don't believe in the fly on the wall approach, then at its best, it becomes a kind of therapeutic process to be in your film, for them to be in the film. And so it's going to change them. But that's the kind of change I love, because frankly, we know what we as filmmakers get from making these films. It's pretty evident what we get. We get to make a film, go to film festivals, and maybe have success. It's great when your subjects can get something from this experience that's really meaningful for them too, that wouldn't have happened without the film.
Are you consciously aware when you are in the midst of whatever project you're in the middle of, that we are living in a time when the definition of truth is a little under fire, and where we actually would have thought we would have settled the definition of that word, but I don't want to, your work is often political, but it's rarely polemical. Do you think that's a fair assessment?
Yes.
And do you think that the current administration might bring out a different ragey, angry, crazy, wild-eyed side in you, or is it just me? Oh, I'm sorry, we're in DC, Jesus.
That's, if I were to do a film on Trump, I think there would certainly be some of that in it. But I probably wouldn't do a film on Trump, because first of all, I'm sure there's a lot of people making a film on Trump right now. But I kind of believe that I have to, if I'm going to do a film on someone, I have to feel connected to them. It doesn't mean that I believe that they're right about everything, or that they don't do things wrong, and that the film shouldn't show that. But I have to feel some kind of connection to them. I'm not, and I'm not saying you shouldn't, but I'm not a believer in doing a biography, let's say, on someone that you despise or hate because you just want to take them down. It's not, there are people that do that, go for it, but that's not, it's too painful. I don't want to do that. And it would be a painful process for me, and I really want the film to be an experience that's memorable for me, too, you know, and that would be.
Is your writing, various writing on your career tends to take that, you know, the obvious divide between life before your career, before Hoop Dreams, and after. Does it really feel that way to you?
Well, yeah, I mean, Hoop Dreams, you know, I had no idea that what was going to happen with Hoop Dreams. We just, when we were making Hoop Dreams, we just hoped we'd get a decent time slot on PBS, you know, basically. And then, so everything that happened with that was totally unexpected. And it did, yeah, I mean, before Hoop Dreams, I wasn't, you know, I hadn't done anything that anyone would care about. And so it definitely was this big dividing line and made a career possible. And Roger Ebert and Chaz, it's so wonderful to see you here tonight. You know, Roger was a very big part of helping Hoop Dreams become significant in that way. And so, but one of the things after Hoop Dreams, because it was, you know, I mean, I run into people now, this is one of my favorite, you know, one of these where a guy comes up and, you know, I'll do Hoop Dreams. You know, I just love Hoop Dreams. You know, oh, thank you. Have you made anything since? You know, that was like a year ago. And I was like, well, you know, I've tried to stay busy. You know, I think the hard thought, the really excellent problem to have that Hoop Dreams created, but it's still a problem nonetheless, is a feeling like, oh, if I don't make another Hoop Dreams, then I'm a one-shot wonder, and it was just luck. And you know, some people might view my career that way. I don't know. If you do, please don't say anything right now. It's a very nice celebration. But my thing was to always try and not look at it that way. To try to, I've always respected filmmakers who I feel like are just working filmmakers who go out and they keep making stuff, and that they continue to challenge themselves to not try and just duplicate what they did before, but do different kinds of films. And I've tried to do that. It's one of the reasons I love Martin Scorsese. It's like, you know, he's made some amazing films. He's made some films that are not so great, but he just keeps making films. You know, he keeps at it, and I love that about his work.
So talk to us a little bit about how your family has kind of affected your interest in particular subjects, or just the career in general.
Well,
they're right here, so they, you know.
Yeah, that was an excellent question, Michael. My wife and my daughter are here. We have 3 kids altogether. I think my wife, you know, she's actually in Stevie because my wife, as it turns out, works with sex offenders and knew Stevie, of course, because we were married at the time that I was a big brother to him, so she knew Stevie quite well. I think that, you know, she's always a great bellwether about when I'm thinking about doing a film to begin with, about what do you think about this idea, and she's always exceedingly honest with me about that stuff. A film like Abacus, I wasn't sure I wanted to do that because I was getting ready to gear up to do America to Me, and I wasn't sure it was possible to even try and do that, but when I told her about it, she went, oh, well, I think you need to do this. And so she was a big part of why I did it. And you know, she's someone that has a tremendous insight, moral center. And then my kids, you know, they are, you know, we have like about the best kids one could have. I mean, they're all like very different from each other in a lot of ways, but they have such strong sense of purpose in life and who they are, and believe in justice and all those things. And my daughter, who's sitting here, went and did 2 years in the Peace Corps in Senegal, and now works at the Peace Corps and is going to American U for law school at night. My youngest son is in the biz and has worked with me. He shoots and directs now, and makes music videos, and so he's, you know. And my oldest son has got an amazing wife and is a bike messenger in Seattle and is just an awesome young man.
Your daughter, by the way, said that you were never around when she was growing up. Not true.
Well played. You had to go through all of that just so you could nail me.
Now, your filmmaker son it's a project that's probably going to happen, but you're going to work with him on something. Is it?
Yes.
Well,
he's worked with me on. He worked with me on America to Me, but also on Life Itself, but in a lesser capacity than he will work on this one. This is a new project that we're going to get underway with. You know, Chicago right now is gearing up for two major significant things. One is a mayoral election, and there are 9 challengers to Rahm Emanuel, and it's quite a collection of people that are poised to replace him. And then the Laquan McDonald trial is going to start up this summer. So for many years, inspired by a Chris Marker film, Le Jolie Mine, made years ago, A Portrait of Paris, I saw in grad school. For many years, I've wanted to do a portrait, a kind of mosaic portrait of Chicago, but at finding the right time when there's a significant moment, and I think we are in that moment in Chicago. And so the idea is to use the mayoral election and the Laquan McDonald trial as kind of a spine, but it's really a portrait of the people of the city, you know, racially, economically, you know, a very sort of serendipitous journey through the city of Chicago. And my son is going to be one of the primary DPs on that because he's young and got a great eye, and I think he'll just bring a real quality to it.
We're just about to queue up the first episode of America to Me, but I just wanted to end on this question. Is there one moment during the filming where maybe the surprise and the satisfaction of what just simply happened because the time was right and the work, the prep had been done, but then something else takes over that you remember? Like, what's it right now that you were thinking, well, this is why I'm pleased to be a documentary film?
Oh my God, yes. I mean, there are so many moments like that. I could go through every film and pick out several moments where you are just completely surprised by real life in a way that, you know, was way beyond anything I could have conceived of if I were trying to write it. I like to say that only maybe Tennessee Williams could have done better than real life. And I'll give you an example from Stevie, for example, that in that film, many of you probably have not seen that film, but spoiler alert, at the end of the film, he's going to be going off to prison. And he's sitting around the table with his grandmother, who basically raised him, his girlfriend, Tanya, who's just an angel on earth. And it's his last day of freedom. He's about to go and be taken into custody. And his grandmother can't bring herself to talk about the significance of this day. And so what she does is she talks about a dog in the neighborhood that people are really angry about because they believe that that dog is bad. And she knows that that dog isn't that bad, that dog is actually okay, that dog is fine. And she's really talking about Stevie, right? And I'm sitting there and we're filming and it just dawns on me that this is her way of trying to express something that she cannot express otherwise. And those are the kind of moments that you look for in documentary because you feel so alive as a filmmaker and you feel like you're capturing something truly authentic that you couldn't make up.
I think with The Interrupters, Life Itself, Abacus, and I've seen the first 5 of the 10 episodes of America. We will see the first one tonight, but your work has never been better. And I'd like to just thank you on behalf of all of us here for all the good work we've seen over the years. stand.
Yeah, let me just set you up a little bit for it. And before I do, I want to recognize some people in the audience. First of all, our partners in this series, it literally could not have been done without their support in every way, which is our partners at Participant Media are here, and Diane Wireman and Elise Perlstein is here. Several of the participant folks are here, and we couldn't be happier for that. We also have one of the series producers, ditto, Risa Sanders-Weir is here. Risa, stand up. Just stand up. And then on this series, it's we shot something like 1,400 hours, and I recruited this incredible group of filmmakers to serve as segment directors. We each, along with myself, we followed individual stories during the course of the school year. And one of them is with us tonight, in part because he has an amazing film at the festival called Minding the Gap, which is his debut documentary. So I'm not an idiot. I hired Bing to work on America to Me. Bing Liu is here. So the idea of this was, this is another one of those I've been wanting to do for years, but this is a case where I never thought I'd be able to do it because our kids went to Oak Park River Forest High School, which Oak Park is this, you'll learn about it some, but essentially it's this very liberal, diverse suburb, old suburb of Chicago, sits right on the western edge. We live 4 blocks from the city line. It's a very different world between 4 blocks to the east of us and Oak Park, and it's a community that takes enormous pride in its diversity and its liberalism, and the public schools are well funded. And so for years I thought it would be great to do a film about what's going on around race and education in a place like Oak Park, because there are issues there. And you'd think if any place could solve it, it would be Oak Park. For that reason, I thought they would never let me into the schools. And I was right about that until I found out through the other series producer, John Conde, who was a teacher there, that the school board would make the decision about whether we could film or not the administration. So over the objection of the administration, the school board voted to allow us in to film for a year in the school. And so we went in and we spent a year following up eventually a dozen students and the school as a whole, and made a 10-hour plus miniseries. So you're going to see the first episode, which introduces you to some of the subjects, certainly not all 12, thank God. And we're not going to have time for Q&A or anything afterwards, but hopefully you'll enjoy it, and it will make you want to watch it when it airs on Stars in the fall. So that's that. And I want to thank you again, Michael, for doing this with me tonight.